Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mastering Midlife podcast, How to Thrive When the World Asks the Most of You. I am your host, Mark Silverman. Today, I'm joined by an incredible woman named Rachel Martin. I just met Rachel recently and have instantly fallen in love, and I can't wait to share her with you. She is the force behind the Finding Joy website, which, by the way, we'll put in the show notes, and she wrote a book called The Brave Heart of Motherhood. She's been on the Today Show. She's been in Inc. magazine, Huffington Post. She's considered one of the 50 most influential social media people. But how she got this way wasn't by being glamorous. It was by revealing, as she says, the highlight reel behind motherhood, the struggle she had of having 7 children over 15 years and being real about that. So, Rachel, thank you for joining us on the show.
Well, thank you. I'm super excited to be here. This is a topic I'm very, very passionate about. And so I know we'll have a good conversation.
So what I told Rachel before the show was we're not going to prepare a specific subject, because if you go to her website, you can see her really uncover so much stuff. But I said, Rachel, you and I just met on an airplane. We're sitting in first class, by the way. And we have our warm chocolate chip cookie, even though we probably both don't eat sugar. And we're having a conversation about who you are and what you do and why you're here. And that's where I want to go with this show. So Rachel, it's so nice to meet you.
It's so nice to meet you as well. I see that you're eating that cookie there. I'd like to offer you mine because I don't eat gluten. So I don't
either. So I think we'll trade that. We'll trade it in for some seed crackers or something.
Yes. If we're lucky and the airline actually has a gluten-free option for us. Yes.
Don't worry. I carry some in my backpack. I will share with you. So tell me your story. Tell me how you got here.
Well, I have an interesting story. So I'm an entrepreneur and I'm flying out to speak, going back with our on the plane scenario. And I'm speaking about entrepreneurs and women about how to reclaim your life. And this is just one of the many journeys and days that I get to spend in the air.
How did you get to this? What is the story that you share with those people? Where did you come from?
Well, I really share a story of being in a place where you think that you're stuck, living in that kind of it is what it is mentality. I lived that way for a long time. And I tell people, women, I say that if you live with it's no big deal or I'm fine or it doesn't matter, that's a wake-up call. And I lived that way for probably 15 years of my life. And there came a moment when I realized I was tolerating life. And I didn't want to tolerate life anymore. I knew that not only for myself, I wanted to live fully, but I was also teaching an example to my kids. And so I started writing about it. And the more I wrote about it, the freer I became. And the freer I became, the more people wanted to know, how do you do this? And that's the story.
It's so moving. And the backdrop, when in reading about your story and the 7 children, the financial struggles that you had, the unconsciousness that you had around your life that came crashing down. So we're talking about midlife on this podcast. Mm-hmm. And it's usually when there's an event or something happens, it's either internal, a shift happens, or external, your world explodes. And there's a moment when you said everything changed, when you decided to be brave.
Yeah, there's definitely.
So moved by that statement.
Well, I appreciate that. I think bravery, oftentimes we think of it as these giant moments in life. Like they're the moments that you see on movies where you're like, whoa, they're so brave. But truthfully, I think the bravest moments are when we alter that little voice in our head that says, you know what? No, I'm turning around and I'm doing it differently. And that bravery to change the paradigm that you're in or to change your equilibrium, comfortable, that's unbelievably brave. And so there definitely was a moment in my life where I was like, I'm just tired of existing. And I came to that place. It was midlife, but I was probably about 35 at that point. And I was seeing friends of mine that dealt with cancer and died. And it was just so impactful to my life because I realized I'm not only doing a disservice to them, to myself. They would love these days. And here I am just kind of meandering around with this idea that I had 50, 60, 70 years left to live. And I realized I was almost being ungrateful for the passage of time in front of me.
You mentioned a moment where it was time to look at debt, look at finances, and your finances were basically in shambles. And the moment that viscerally took me was
Mhm.
the small thing of being brave to look at my credit report, the small thing of being brave to call one of my creditors and set up a payment plan. So
Mhm.
bravery doesn't mean out on the battlefield. It meant picking up the phone, opening up that app, and looking at your life, and not being a passive uh, uh, participant, but actually being a creator in your world. Tell me about that,
Yeah,
Chi.
it is. It is. I think for a lot of time, for many years, I lived in a certain role, in a certain box, and that there were spaces in my life that I thought that's not my responsibility, or I'm going to be the best mom and wife and all of that. And then there came a moment where I either ignored the reality that there was severe financial debt and kept thinking, it's not my job. I don't know what to do. Or I decided to basically armor up, decided to look at it and take a stance and realize that I had the capabilities in me to fix it. It wasn't that it was easy. I tell people all the time, it's not like I opened the credit report and the next day everything was perfect. It was more, I opened it up and I knew exactly the battle I needed to fight. It's
Mm,
really hard to fight something when you're just kind of living in the dark.
beautiful. So tell me what you do now. What do you share with people? What's your mission?
Oh, my mission is that women, specifically moms, they don't lose their heart in the midst of motherhood. I've met so many moms that all of a sudden have this moment where they can say, I'm a good mom, or I'm good at this, but I have no idea who I am anymore. And I think a lot of that, in the beginning years of motherhood, you're basically keeping a small human alive. So it's easy to not have self time. But there comes a moment where they get older and there's this breath, this pause that we in this culture have, that I think for most of history and time, women and nobody really had this breath. And now we have this beauty in having space. We have freedom. What do you want to do on the weekend is the question. And when we have that time, all of these, I discovered that women would be like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I love anymore. And as you talk about, and I talk about, this midlife crisis point, well, I truly believe crisis is a disservice to an actual place of actual evolving as humans. It's no longer, it shouldn't be a crisis. We don't expect our 20-year-old to do what they did when they were 10. Like my 23-year-old daughter, I'm like, I'm not ever going to say to her, Hannah, you figured out what you wanted to do when you were 11. How come you're shifting it? We know that we shift and evolve, but yet somehow shifting and evolving when you're at my age, people are like, whoa, she's in a crisis. Versus, you know what? This is just the natural evolution of who we are as people. And going back to that analogy of, history and time, 1,000 years ago, if I lived to be 40, I would be considered old and lucky. And now all of a sudden we have an extra 40 years to figure out.
That's perspective. I love that you say that, because when I'm doing my keynotes, I always say that the midlife crisis isn't inevitable. It's a function of not evolving, of not listening to the inner voice, not exploring that space, and getting scared when things don't fit anymore and you need to change. Start anesthetize that, fix that. Don't even explore that your
Right.
relationship needs to shift or change. Don't even explore that your job or your vocation no longer fits,
Right.
because it's too scary of the implications. And that's where the crisis, and that's where, for me, life smacks you hard.
It does. Well, one of my favorite quotes is by Eleanor Roosevelt. It's the do one thing every day that scares you. And I love that idea that there's this part that we should be experiencing new things. Well, my one son the other day said to me, do you know, Mom, that you have another quote on the same wall that says, do one thing every day that makes you happy? And I thought about the dichotomy of them, and then I realized they're really linked. Because often what's on the other side of fear or what scares us is the very thing that makes us happy. And I love that so often we're kind of trained to be comfortable. Ooh, don't do that, plan well, do that. And we kind of shut down that voice of the risk taking or the trying to do something new because it doesn't fit within the box of comfortable.
Mm. So from your experience, because again, I'm going to share a couple of the videos that you've done to really go in depth to your story, because there's some really raw, rich pieces. We're on the other side of that now, where you're somewhat glamorous, you're off, you're off on social media, you're able to get your hair done right, you're able to eat right and be gluten-free now, where that wasn't the case before. So it's very hard for people to put those two things together. I was homeless, right? I was suicidal. I had those things. Nobody would ever think that of me now, as I drive around in my Audi and have a gold watch, and I put on Facebook pictures, videos of how much I love people and all that stuff, right? They would never know that I just wanted to die, right? And I kept, I've kept money in my car and hidden around my house for decades, just in case I'm homeless again, right? So people wouldn't know that. So given the fact that you really do have an earthy realness to you when you're sharing this, and there's a lot of mommy blogs and a lot of things that are really lovely, but they're like the Gwyneth Paltrow goop thing, right?
Right.
Where we're just not scratching the surface of what's real. When you share with people, when people come up to you after you talk or something like that, what are the things that people bring to you that are that you have to hold because of what you decided to do with your life?
It's a lot. It's very much the story that you shared. It's like they instantly feel free to be who they really are, because one of the missions that I preach about is that shame, in which shame is just it's like baggage, walking around with it all the time, and we can't do anything. So going back to my finances, I had a lot of shame. I never wanted to talk about that because I felt so much deep shame about where I was, like it was a measure of worth. And I tell this story about, for me to go from a place of complete shame to going onto national television talking about my finances is in itself a powerful testimony for many, many people. But I always want to keep it real, because even in the highlight places like that, when I was on the Today Show, there's a picture where my agent said, go stand by where it says November 9th, 2018, or today is November 9th. And so I took the picture right before it. And then I wrote an Instagram post that said, to the outside, this may look like the pinnacle moment. But the reality is when I saw the November 9th, that was my son's birthday. And this is a son of mine who no longer lives with me. He lives 1,000 miles away with me in Minnesota and attends school there and lives with his dad. And so as I was there at the highest moment, I also had the deepest pang of motherhood, of losing that moment in that space with my child. So I wrote about it. I wrote about that dichotomy, that sometimes you can see it a certain way, but there is this depth of authenticity to everybody. And that's what I've strived to keep throughout my journey, is being real about the ups and downs in both of it, and freely talking about the places where I used to hide with shame, because it opens it up for somebody else to say, listen, I need someone to talk to. Because most people, they tuck it behind. And then that's where it gets so heavy, where you struggle with everyday, day-to-day doing things.
I get that. One of the things that drives me is when I look around and I look at the $1 million houses that I'm in the middle of, and the high-end cars, and the beautiful Facebook posts of vacations and things. And then I find this person killed themselves. This person had an affair. And, I'm not judging, but like this person is out drinking, like I see them out drinking at parties and things like that. And if we could only go to these gatherings and these parties and someone share something real, so that we all know we're not alone in feeling these things, even though we're really pretty and well put together, I think that it would alleviate a lot of pain and struggle.
Well, it's interesting. As you were writing that, saying that, I wrote down the word aloneness. And then at the very moment you wrote alone. And I think that I really believe, despite being powerfully connected in a social world, we're deeply lonely in a way that we've never experienced before. Going back to my analogy of, let's say, 1,000 years ago, we were never alone. We knew the uniform battle of survival, and we knew that we were stronger when we had to partner with people. You wouldn't ever you wouldn't live and exist on your own. You knew you had to have others to help you survive, or you go to Amish, then the barn building. It was all this community and collaboration. And yet somehow with the advent of stuff and freedom and money, somehow we've trained ourselves that it's okay, we should be alone. Like, yeah, and that a like counts as a friendship. So I really believe that friendship and breaking the cycle of this aloneness comes when somebody decides to kind of break the glass of it, or break it down, and to say, listen, this is who I really am. I mean, I've had experience after experience where I admit something vulnerable, breaking the facade of the Instagram post, and then everyone else is like, you're so brave, thank you for saying that. And then they tell their stuff.
Right. Somebody's got to go first. You know, the irony is, I made a video this morning. I was in the woods walking my dog, and I just felt like joyous love connection with the world, right? Any very new agey, but I just felt like I just feel it. And I feel that way most of the time. And the irony is, I spend a lot of time talking to people who are depressed, who are suicidal, who came through this, who had a disability, you know, like, and what are they going through? And for me, I shared that I was molested, that I was homeless, that I was in debt, that I was this and this. And I feel so connected, so joyous, so light. You know, you think I talk about these heavy things. I feel the complete opposite most of the time. So what you're saying is, you know, like when you go behind the Instagram post, you give those other people permission. It's so simple, and it doesn't cost a cent. It just costs walking through that veil, that thin rice paper thin veil of shame, to the other side of light. It looks like a brick wall that you can't get through, and it's just paper thin.
Yeah, that is a beautiful analogy for it, because I mean, you think that you can't make it. And a lot of times I'll ask myself, what is the worst thing that will happen? And can I survive it? And it breaks it down. Like, can I survive that moment if I have to call a creditor 5 years ago or whatever? And the truth is I can. And I kind of
Hold
going
on, I
with your
want to just say,
analogy.
so you survived it, and then you thrived,
Right.
right? Another rock was taken off your back.
Right. Exactly. And that's it. And so going back to your, like, kind of keep grounded, part of my mission for myself is to keep grounded, because I think sometimes we can go through change and realize and think nothing's ever changed. Oh, I'm not evolved. I've not moved forward. And so, like I shared on the Today Show, one of the things that I did is I benchmark every time I get gas for my van, because going back to the years when I had no money, I would have to go in and pay with change. And that was when I lived in Minnesota, and it was horrible because it's cold and it was humiliating. I just felt this level of shame having to come in, give them $2.84, and, you know, and then have to come back the next day. So I realized the day that I was filling up my van, and it was unconscious at first, but all of a sudden I had this realization that for me to go to a gas station, put my credit card in, and, you know, a debit card, whatever, and go back and sit in my van and wait for the clink of it to being done, and that I had evolved. I had moved my life forward. And so every single time I get gas, I have that moment of almost gratitude for that bravery of the person 10 years ago that decided, you know what, I'm going to change my life. And I encourage people to develop those benchmarks, because most of change isn't instantaneous. It's like this inch by inch by inch progress. And it's very easy to acclimate and think this is the way it's always been, and to forget the space from where you came from.
Wow. You know, mine is the grocery store. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when I walk into Whole Foods, I
Mm-hmm.
still, to this day, I'm in awe that I get
Right.
to be in the place where the apples are shiny, right? And I can go down the supplement aisle and get my turmeric. And
Right.
when I check out, I really do, like, I remember being homeless and punching my card at Subway to get my fifth sandwich free for the week, right?
Right. Right.
And it does make it exquisite, the perspective exquisite, when I do focus on it, rather than how come I'm not, you know, how come I can't, there's a Mercedes that I want. It's
Right.
$95,000. Like, how come I
Right.
can't have that? I only drive an Audi, right? When I used to drive, you know, a Dodge Dart where you could see the ground, right? And
Right.
you know, I can choose to look at either side.
Yeah, that's very, when you were telling the Whole Foods, the grocery store, my memory is I've actually written about it that if you ever see a mom or somebody standing by the cart rearranging things, there's a good chance they're counting the dollar of everything in that cart, because I have this memory of going to the grocery store
Wow.
with $20. And when you have to count, and I can remember being like, and then the kids would ask me a question and I couldn't get something. And I would always strategically know, I'd put the items on the belt, and I'd always have that, oh, I didn't really want that one. I'd always have the one item I could give back if I went over my amount. And so it was really this article of, I see you, because there's so many people that don't, they just are lost, that alone. Like, I see you, I know what it's like to count groceries. And it starts off with it being like 348, 545. And I just went through that litany of what it was like to actually do math all the time at the grocery store. And now it's the same thing when you talk about going into Whole Foods, where I can go in and, I have a budget in my head that I like to spend, but I'm not nervous and I'm not anxious as the total comes up. And I'm not nervous as I swipe my card, worrying there'll be money in there. But it was a process. That's what I tell people over and over and over again. It is a process to get from A to B. And anybody that tells you that it can be done in 2 weeks with 4 simple steps for 20 minutes a day, they've just not had to go from A to B.
So that's another thing that I love about you. I was going to ask you to clarify how you
Yeah.
got to that space, and you did it automatically. You do that in your blog posts, you do that in your videos, you do that in all your writing and all your speaking. And that's something I really appreciate about you is you give the goal that you've received, and then you give the journey that you took to get there, so we can see underneath the iceberg, from the meme of how
Right.
that happened. So what's next for you? What's on your agenda? What are your next projects?
Well, I'm going to continue writing. I absolutely feel gifted and honored to have this space online. I think for many years, people have wanted a voice, and we have this platform that's fantastic. So
That's the Finding Joy platform.
yep, the Finding Joy platform. But I'm just talking about the internet in general. I think that I've traveled, and so many people don't have a voice. And so part of my mission too is to create a community and a culture that's not about competition, not about dragging somebody else down. It's about really partnering with people, understanding that this voice, this platform is a gift. Because if we didn't have it, I can't even imagine. So it's easy to not see it. So I'm going to continue to write. I continue to speak. We'll see if another book comes in the process. Book writing, it's a different beast in itself. And just to see what's next. I'm always partnering with my community, listening to them. It's a dialogue. It's not just me speaking. It's this give and take, ebb and flow. When they write about what they're feeling, that's like, we work on that. We talk about that.
Wow, great. So where can people find you?
Well, they can find me at findingjoy.net, or on Facebook, it's Finding Joy blog. And then my book is The Brave Art of Motherhood. And you can find that on Amazon or all sorts of booksellers near you.
And all of that will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you. I had a good conversation. I appreciate it.
I'm hoping this isn't the last conversation.
I agree. I agree.
And to everybody else, thank you for staying with us. I really appreciate your time and your attention. I love you, and have a great rest of the day.